Hi, mamas. Welcome back to another episode. Today, we have another Knit and Tell Friday, a super quick tip that's going to make your knitting life easier. And I am also going to talk about what is currently on my needles. So let's dive in. Welcome to the Knitting Mamas podcast. Are you a mom who feels like you're constantly running on empty? Do you crave a creative outlet to recharge but feel lost on where to start or even when to fit in the time for it? And does the idea of adding one more thing to your busy day feel impossible, especially when it's something just for you? In this podcast, you'll discover practical and guilt-free self-care strategies that fit seamlessly into your life. I'll help you break free from the constant comparison and overwhelm that social media often brings, empowering you to pick up your knitting needles instead of your phone and embrace moments of rest, creativity, and mindfulness. My mission is to help you get more rest and feel less stressed through mindful knitting, simple mindset shifts, and creating a morning routine that actually works for you without the guilt. It's time to ditch the endless scroll on social media and focus on what truly matters, your well-being. Hi, I'm Nadine, a mom, wife, and passionate knitter. I have learned the hard way that chasing perfection and comparing myself to others online only leads to burnout. I spent years trying to do it all, only to realize that taking care of myself was in fact the key to showing up as my best self for my family. I finally let go of the pressure to be perfect, embraced progress over perfection, and created simple routines that actually work. Along the way, I found peace and joy in the cozy, calming rhythm of knitting. Now I'm excited to share these practical tips and habits with you so that you can reclaim your time, recharge, and rediscover the things that bring you happiness. So, if you're ready to take control of your stress, ditch social media comparison, rekindle your creativity, and recharge with a hobby you love, this podcast will guide you every step of the way. Take a deep breath, grab your knitting needles, and let's start creating a life with less stress and more joy, one stitch at a time. Happy Friday, guys. Super excited to be back here with you this Friday on the podcast. I would love to hear from you what you think about these little Knit and Tell Friday episodes. Hop on over into our free community over on Facebook, where, by the way, I just went live earlier this week to dive deeper into the tip that I shared last week, which was the clean edges on your knitting projects tip, if you remember, if you listen to that episode. But what I do every week following the Knit and Tell Friday, I go into the group, I go live, and I actually show the tip and how to do it and what it looks like. So come on, join us over there. It's totally free. You can go to bit.ly/knittingmamas, bit.ly/knittingmamas, and join us in the Facebook group. Can't wait to welcome you there. Once again, it's totally free, and you get to join the weekly videos where I show the tip from the Knit and Tell Fridays. We also have a thing called Knit and Chill Circle, which is starting up again in October, and I'm so excited about it. We did these starting in January every month, but then took a break over the summer, and it's just a virtual get-together where we all bring our projects and do an intentional 30 minutes of knitting and also chatting, of course, connecting in the community, which is so much fun. And it's one of the biggest reasons why I love knitting so much in a group. And, I think it'll be great for you to join us there as well. Especially if you're a beginner, you can bring your questions and we're happy to answer them for you. I wanted to start this episode off with an amazing testimonial that I just read the other day in our community from one of our new members. And it was just so awesome to read this and just really made me happy to see how helpful this podcast is. So let me read this to you. The testimonial says, Nadine, thank you for adding me to the Knitting Mamas group. I listen to your podcasts and I love your knitting advice and stress relief hints. They are very helpful to me. I no longer have children in the home, but I can get stressed easily with life, so I benefit from your helpful advice. Thank you so much. It's literally the reason why I show up every week and try to share what I have learned over the last 10 to 15 years in terms of stress relief and, helping figuring out this whole thing to breathe a little easier and make a little bit more room for the things that I love doing. It's just very amazing to see that it's helpful to you guys too. So thank you so much for sharing that. If you have something to say about this podcast that you want to share, I would love to see it. I would love to read it here on this podcast. You can leave a review on Apple. You can also jump into the Knitting Mamas group like this member did and just share it in there, and I will read it here on the podcast. Again, the link is bit.ly/knittingmamas. All right, today's tip is actually one of the ones that I learned not too long ago and was completely blowing my mind because I had no idea it was even a thing. And it is winding your yarn before you start knitting. So what does that even mean? Because it already comes in like a skein or a yarn ball, right? So like, what the heck? Why do we need to wind that? So what I thought for the longest time is that this was exclusive to the yarn that comes in like a hank, right? Which is kind of like this twisted looking thing, which is also, so it's what they do is after they dye the yarn, they pull it into a longer bundle and then they twist it around. And then it's also tied around a couple of places so it doesn't kind of fall out of shape and gets tangled up. Those, when you unfold them, once you buy them and you kind of unfold them and open them, they are not a yarn ball. They're basically a long wrap of yarn just that you could hold from left to right in your hand. So you could just hold this on your hands, but it's a big, gigantic loop of the yarn just, wrapped in a loop. So that one needs to be put on a yarn winder so that you can then create a smaller yarn ball and you can start your project. Otherwise, it won't work. And that's what I thought this was just reserved for. So I never even looked into it until I actually had that type of yarn. So usually you get those yarn hanks from more like a yarn stores. It's a little more high quality, or, people who are dyeing their yarn in smaller batches. It's usually more on the more expensive side to get this type of yarn, which is why I didn't look into it for a while, because honestly, I was knitting on a budget and there's nothing wrong with that. There's gorgeous, beautiful yarn that is inexpensive. However, I did splurge one time on this gorgeous yarn from a brand called Sorella. I can link it up in the comments or in the show notes. And once I got it, I was like, okay, what do I do with this thing? I gotta do something to be able to actually knit with this. And so I started researching like I do. And here I am sharing it for you so you don't have to do that. And so you put it on this large contraption, if you will, where you can, it just kind of like moves out and it's a large circle that you put the yarn around. And then you take the start of the yarn, put it on a yarn winder, and then you can wind the yarn either manually or you have this little apparatus that you can kind of attach to the side of a table and it just winds it. And it's pretty easy to do. It doesn't take very long. For one of those skeins, it would take probably between 5 to 10 minutes. If you did it manually, they have these basically yarn winders. They look like a large wand. Reminds me of Harry Potter, but they're a lot thicker. And then you would just do that by hand, which takes a lot longer, obviously. But what happens is it puts the yarn into a shape that looks like a cake. They actually call it a cake. And then you can take the yarn from either the inside, because you're going to have a hole on the inside that is created, or you take it from the outside. It depends on how you're going to work with it from then on. So if you just lay it down, maybe in a bowl, in a yarn bowl, or just on a table or in a bag, in a project bag, it is nice to just pull it from the inside because the yarn will literally not move from where you place it because you're just pulling the string from the inside. However, I'm currently using something called a yarn carousel, which is another thing that I'm going to talk about at some other point, where you plop the yarn on and then place it on your table, and it actually just going to start unravel, so to speak, as you pull the yarn and the string from the outside of the yarn ball. It's pretty neat. So both ways work fantastic. And nonetheless, it is a necessary thing to do when you buy yarn, like I just explained, in a hank. However, what I learned back then as well is that you can totally rewind or wind your yarn that comes in a yarn ball already. Because if you have knitted with those in the past, which I'm fairly certain you have if you have started to knit, if you're a beginner, listen up. If you're already doing something else, come back to me right now and listen. This is a very, very cool trick that I highly recommend doing. Is even though they come in a yarn ball and they seem, they seem fine to use right away, which they are. Obviously, you can totally start using it by just pulling the string out of the side and start knitting. But if you take the time to wind it into a cake first, you will actually also be able to just pull the string from the inside. And what won't happen with your yarn ball is it's not going to flip flop and flounder all over the place as you're pulling the string from the outside while you're knitting, which is so very annoying. That's happened to me for so long, for so many years. I was like, what the heck is happening? Why can't I figure this out? There must be a better way to do this. And once again, you could put it in a bowl. They even sell yarn bowls, like specifically for this, where you kind of thread the yarn through a little hole specifically made for that, but they still kind of tumble around and then it can get stuck and it's just annoying. Or if, same thing happens when you put it inside of your basket or your project bag. But if you wind the yarn the way I just explained, and I'm obviously going to link up the yarn winder that I have. It's super inexpensive. The thing is like under $20 as far as I remember. Then 5 to 10 minutes later, you've got your yarn cake. You can start from the inside and your yarn will stay put no matter what you do. So wherever you place it, if it's in your bag, just on your couch, on the table, it'll just stay there and you can just pull the yarn and it is heaven. It's so amazing. It's such a small little thing that I had no idea about. So I am actually here on a mission on the Knit and Tell Fridays to give you all these little tips and tricks that I had never heard before and that are like, whoa, why did nobody tell me about this sooner? So that's the tip for today. If you want to see how this thing looks in action, come on over into the Knitting Mamas group, bit.ly/knitting mamas, bit.ly/knitting mamas. Come on over on next Wednesday. I'm going to hop over there and go live, and I'm going to show you exactly how this thing works. If you already know how it works, fantastic. And if you want to purchase one of the yarn winders, just go into the show notes and I'll have the link there ready for you. And you can go ahead and make your knitting life so much easier. Okay, really quick to wrap this episode up. There's not a lot of news as to what I am currently working on and what's on my needles, but I have an update. I'm almost done with the landscape wrap that I've been working on for a few weeks now. And I've solely focused on that. But I have to admit too, yesterday was a day where I literally did not even touch it. I did not have the time. I didn't make the time to sit down and knit. I had so much going on with my kids, my house, my kids' school. I was, at the end of the day, I was like, okay, I'm just so tired. I can't even look at this. I just need to lay down and sleep. So there are days like that, but I can tell you, I missed it so much. So this is definitely a thing that I need to do every day to feel complete, to feel like, I have created something and I have taken time for myself. I have relaxed, and definitely not my favorite when I don't get to it, which is why I intentionally make time for it. Yesterday was one of the few days where that didn't work out. But I just did a little bit of math. It's funny because I have less than 3 rows left on this pattern. Sounds like, oh, that's a 5-minute job. Yeah, normally it would be, but in this particular pattern, each row has 340 something stitches. I was wrong last week. I said 250. It's over 340 stitches. So 3 rows are a little over 1,000 stitches, and that does take me a while. I'm not the fastest knitter. I'm pretty fast, but I'm also not knitting for speed. Most times I'm knitting for relaxation, and speed's not really going with that for me. So I take my time, and yeah, I'm almost there, you guys. I am almost there. It's also been a busy week in regards to like reading. I have made progress in my book, but I'm not done yet. So I can't really give you any feedback on the current book that I'm reading, but I will link it up again. I would love to hear too in our group if you are a big reader and if this is at all something that you even want to hear about, for me to talk about the novels that I'm currently reading and that I can recommend. So with that said, I hope you have a fantastic Friday if you're listening to this on the day it's airing. If not, enjoy your weekend, enjoy your day, whatever you're doing. Make sure you make some time for your knitting craft. If you are a brand new to knitting mama and you want to learn how to knit, I have got you covered. I have a YouTube beginner knitting playlist that you can pull up by just popping your email in and then you can just download it. You'll be getting an email from me with the link. You can go to thenittingmamas.com/knitting beginners, and you can get your beginner playlist right there. Get started as soon as possible. The weekend is always a wonderful opportunity to go to the craft store, grab yourself some tools. Last week, as a matter of fact, on the podcast, we did talk about my essential tools that I would get if I was to begin my knitting journey again. So great opportunity this weekend. Head on over, get your playlist, get your supplies, and let's get started. And I'll see you over in the Knitting Mamas Facebook group. And of course, next week, right here on the podcast. Thanks so much for hanging out with me on today's episode. I hope you're walking away with a bit more inspiration and a few ideas to make your self-care a priority. If today's chat gave you a little boost, I'd love it if you could leave a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. It helps other moms find our cozy corner of the podcast world and start their own guilt-free self-care journey. Thanks again, and remember, you deserve time for yourself to recharge and feel your best. Catch you next time on the Knitting Mamas podcast.